to begin today by acknowledging that the land we are on is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. We recognize and deeply respect the historic connection that many First Nations peoples have to this place and acknowledge that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples. It's also very important to recognize that acknowledging territory, as we've just done, is a beginning and not an ending in terms of the work ahead of all of us on the path to truth and reconciliation. Good morning. My name is Rebecca Shelley, and I have the honor of representing local businesses as the Executive Director of the Grimsby and District Chamber of Commerce. I'm truly delighted to be here this morning as we wrap up our fall Road to Recovery panel series with this timely and very important discussion about housing affordability. It's an issue that affects not just people, but the businesses across Niagara as they work to fill vacant positions and drive their companies and organizations full throttle into recovery mode. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion. The Grimsby Chamber is extremely proud to welcome all of you on behalf of the Niagara Chamber Partnership. The Niagara Chamber Partnership represents chambers and businesses from across Niagara and includes the municipalities of Fort Erie, Grimsby, Lincoln, Niagara Falls, Niagara-on-the-Lake, Pelham, Port Colborne, Thorold, Waynfleet, Welland, and West Lincoln. If you'd like more information on how to unlock the power of a Niagara-wide network with the Niagara Chamber Partnership, reach out to your home chamber for details. Because this session wraps up our fall series, we have a few very important thank yous to extend before we get underway. A very special thank you to our tech sponsor, Brian LaChapelle, and his team at B4 Networks. B4 Networks support has been key to bringing this series to life. Thank you, Brian. On behalf of all of the chambers in the Niagara Chamber Partnership, we are truly grateful for your support and sponsorship of this series. We've also been extraordinarily lucky to have the thoughtful and insightful moderators from Armstrong Strategy Group lead the Road to Recovery series. A heartfelt thanks to John Armstrong and Armstrong Strategy Group for your energy, your time, and your truly intentional engagement with panelists across so many industries in Niagara. Today, we are lucky to be joined by Jeff Bolichowski, who will introduce our panelists and moderate the discussion. With that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to kick off our wrap-up panel. Jeff, over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. And thanks everyone who's joining us today. It's great to see everyone coming out to join us for this great panel discussion. My name is Jeff Bolichowski. I am the Senior Media and Policy Analyst at the Armstrong Strategy Group, and I'm very happy to be here as your moderator today. We've got a fantastic group of speakers with us here this morning for this installment of the Road to Recovery series, and I'm sure they also very much appreciate that everyone's here to take the time out of your day. So I'm not going to take too much of your time. I'm going to turn this over quickly here to our first speaker, and he's someone I know we're all very familiar with here in Niagara. Jim Bradley has served as chair of the region of Niagara since December 2018. Prior to that, he represented St. Catharines at Queen's Park from 1977 to 2018. During that time, he's held many ministerial portfolios: environment, transportation, municipal affairs and housing, tourism and recreation, so on and so forth. He served as a St. Catharines City Councillor for 7 years as a teacher with the Lincoln County Community Board of Education. He's contributed to the community through hockey and baseball coaching, refereeing, and management, member of the Grantham Optimist Club, and supported many community organizations such as Rank and Run, Gillian's Place, and others. Chair Bradley, welcome, and thanks so much for being here with us.
Jeff, very good to be with you and with all the panelists today and those who are watching. I'm delighted to be able to take part in a housing affordability discussion here in Niagara because it's a preeminent issue for members of Regional Council and indeed for all of us. I think most of us would agree, first of all, that housing affordability is a major challenge for our region. But it's important to note, I think, that it's impacting virtually all parts of Ontario now and most parts of the country as well. So we're not alone in that. It doesn't do us any good to, in terms of making it easier for us, but there are others who are looking for solutions as we are to housing affordability situations right across the country. One aspect that is driving Niagara's real estate market, as everybody knows, is our proximity to Toronto. Niagara was recently described to me as Toronto's affordability solution. And I think that's really what it is for a lot of people who are looking to Niagara and other places outside of Toronto to solve their situation. As more individuals from the GTA come to Niagara and drive up home prices, the impacts cascade down into the rental market, pushing those who traditionally could have afforded a starter home into apartments and drastically raising the cost of rent. This in turn pushes more residents to a point where they cannot find affordable rental housing, putting more pressure on subsidized units. And while the government certainly has a role to play in ensuring everyone has a place to call home, we recognize as well it will take all of us working together to make this a reality. This includes the municipal, provincial, and federal governments, as well as the private and non-profit sectors. And we're very fortunate here in Niagara that we have some very top-notch home builders who provide the stock, who do the building themselves and provide the stock for us. Government doesn't have people who go out and actually build these homes. It takes very skilled people to do it. And we are fortunate in Niagara to have those companies that are doing an excellent job in that regard, and they play a central role. The Niagara region is attacking this problem on a number of fronts, with the first thing being an effort to increase the stock of rental housing through Niagara Regional Housing. Since taking office, this term of council has made a significant direct investment of nearly $20 million into building affordable units across Niagara. In addition to the contribution from other levels of government, nearly $49 million has been invested into the construction of reasonably priced rentals across the region. And although this investment represents a net increase of 229 new units, the wait list for affordable housing is still very significant. To put this in context, over the last 15 years, over $106 million has been invested from all levels of government, creating more than 930 units, and a lengthy wait list still persists. What I think is encouraging is that the federal and provincial governments, which had withdrawn to a certain extent during a certain period of time from the housing situation, are back in it, both the federal and provincial government. And I have the opportunity to work with, as we all do, two ministers who I think are very concerned about affordable housing and know us in Niagara and our needs. Federal Minister Hassan has met with us here. He's been down in Niagara, and he now has the title of Minister of Housing nationally. And Steve Clark, who is the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, has been in Niagara many times. I keep in constant contact with Steve, and he certainly is aware of our needs. And both the federal and provincial government are making efforts now to become more involved directly in terms of funding of affordable housing and providing, let's say, policies which are conducive to affordable housing. We are attacking this issue through updating our official plan. We're taking steps to build policies that better encourage higher density development, mixed use, and more affordable forms of housing. Ensuring a balanced approach to affordability, growth, and the environment will play a central role in our new official plan. We're seeking input from everyone, whether it's those who are directly in the business or the general public, on our official plan. Increasing the stock of the right type of housing will have a positive effect on the challenge of affordability. Building the right type of housing, such as apartments, which are badly needed, affordable condos and townhomes, will likely allow younger people who wish this option to get into the market and open up more of the rental stock to those who need it most. It is my hope that changes to our official plan will help act as a catalyst to encourage the type of development we need to keep our younger families here. And that's why we're looking for input from so many people within who reside in Niagara, even some outside who may have some suggestions for us. Last month, the region passed a motion to fund incentive programs that will encourage the construction of affordable types of housing. And I think while there is not unanimity in council over all of the incentive programs, there is unanimity in trying to provide incentives for those programs which will have an impact on affordable housing. So that is encouraging. As regional government, we know that affordable rental units are not always the most profitable forms of housing in the short term for developers. So our incentive programs will help encourage more development in this area, we hope. We also continue to lobby the provincial and federal governments to make sure Niagara is getting its fair share of funding from senior levels of government. And I think now they recognize that we are a site that is under a lot of pressure in terms of housing. They may have felt before that Niagara wasn't impacted by this, and to a certain extent we were not in the 20, 25 years ago. We certainly are today. So while Niagara Region is the so-called service manager for affordable housing, the responsibility to provide this service sits with the provincial government. So far this term, we've been successful in attracting millions of dollars of investment for this kind of housing. Finally, I want to end on this note. The situation for which we currently find ourselves didn't happen overnight, quite obviously, nor was there one singular cause. It stands to reason that we will not be able to resolve this immediately, and the steps we take will be equally as complex. So I think it's important to remember that as we debate possible solutions, there will not be one silver bullet, quick fix, and we should be cautious of any promises of a quick fix. There are a number of suggestions have been out there. Other municipalities across the country have tried different ways to bring about affordable housing. And I think it's worthwhile looking at whether they've been successful or not. A lot of these proposals sound good on paper, and when you put them into actual use, you find out that they don't have the impact that you'd hope for. So I think it's going to be valuable to listen to the experts, as we call them in housing, both those, as I say, who are the advocates and those who actually provide the housing. And hopefully with that kind of input, and I say we can't confine that to strictly to Niagara, because we can learn from other jurisdictions, even jurisdictions outside our country, what has worked, and as important, what hasn't worked. Because you don't want to go down a path that leads to not success. A lot of anticipation, a lot of hope, and then that success and anticipation is dashed by reality. So we want to ensure that when we embark upon new initiatives, new policies, that in fact they are working and will have the impact that we all want. And everybody on this panel, I know, has a common interest in being able to provide housing for everyone who wishes to have that housing. And today we're zeroing in on, as we should, those who require affordable housing. So I'm looking forward to the remarks of other panelists today as well. I think it'll be a good dialogue.
All right, thank you so much, Chair Bradley. I think we've all got a pretty good sense now of just how complicated this issue is, and what it takes to address this sort of thing. So at this time, we're going to be moving into the panel discussion. Joining Chair Bradley on the panel, we'd like to welcome three more guests. Joanne Heritz is Assistant Professor of Political Science at Brock University. Chuck McShane is also with us, Executive Officer at Niagara Home Builders Association and Vice Chair of the Niagara Falls Bridge Commission. And Nicole Regehr is Interim Executive Director of Gillian's Place. So I think we couldn't ask for a better group of people to talk about housing here in Niagara. This is such an important topic of conversation, and I think it's become even more important as the years have gone on. So I think the first question I'll throw out there for all of our panelists is, when we talk about housing, there are three issues that we kind of consider. Affordable housing, which we kind of talk about as households paying more than 30% of their before-tax income. Adequate housing, referring to homes needing major repairs, lacking basic services, et cetera. And the idea of suitable housing, which is the idea of overcrowding. So can anyone, and I'll open this up to the entire panel, does anyone know sort of the status of these issues here in Niagara? And do we have an issue with any one of the three over the other two? Or is any one of those particularly great? So I'll open that up to the entire panel for thoughts.
I think what we experience here at Gillian's Place is really just a lack of affordable housing units. It's really impossible to find. As everybody knows, there's a very lengthy wait list for any type of subsidy. And so looking for market rent options are very difficult. I mean, even the ones that are available are unaffordable, and ones that are there's so much competition for those units that some of our clientele who are coming from situations where they may not have had employment, who may be on OW or ODSP, they're not even qualifying for the very minimal amount of units that are available that would be affordable and safe. And so that's leading to some dangerous situations where, families are staying in abusive or dangerous situations simply because they have nowhere to go. So I think, for us here, it's just the lack of affordable housing options that seems to stand out from the rest.
Just to sort of echo to what Nicole has said, is that there's, I don't know a breakdown of those stats as to, affordable housing or adequate housing or suitable housing. But as she said too, people are not living in adequate housing, but may not be able to do anything about it. So, and those people aren't really asked the conditions of their housing. So it is a difficult statistic to report on.
I think the big thing we need to look at is that, yes, we do need to increase our stock with affordable housing. And I think the reason that we're having this conversation is we're talking about housing affordability. Housing affordability has totally got out of reach in the Niagara region because of the carousel that's been happening here. People are coming in out of Toronto, raising the prices. We have so much red tape to put more holes into the ground. It takes 14 to 18 weeks now just to get a building permit. It takes 3 years to get a site plan approval. We know that property values do not go down. We also believe that our industry can build and work to build some more affordable units. We need to work with our counterparts, and we're willing to do that. When we look at, and Chair Bradley and I have had this conversation before, when we look at Niagara Regional Housing, just for one building that they built on Carlton Street, it was $300,000 a unit is what it cost the region and the taxpayers of this region to provide that. When I bring that back to our builders and our developers, when we take into the consideration, there's no development charges. Generally, there's no land charges for that. It's regional property. I think in order to get more affordable housing, we need to, first and foremost, the regional government should, and the municipalities should be working with members of our industry. We're the pros, that's what we do. We're willing to help. But keep in mind, it still has to be able, we still need to make money. And if we address, but then we go back to the housing affordability issue, if we address a lot of the red tape and the delays in permitting, we're going through it, and now we're going through a new OP that's sterilizing even more land, which is increasing the land cost. Keep in mind, in the next 10 years, we have 64,000. That's our population increase in the next 10 years. That's what's projected by the government. On average, we need to build 2,750 new units just to be able to accommodate that population. And the higher the costs go to put these units into the ground, the more affordable housing we need. We need to stop the carousel somehow, because it's a big carousel. Our kids are going away to university, they're coming back, they're getting on the carousel, and then somebody from Toronto comes right behind them, it kicks them off the carousel, and they head up somewhere else where they can afford, where we can, where we can actually move forward. And we need our youth. Our youth is what's going to drive us. They're the ones who are going to pay our taxes. They're going to pay our bills when we retire, when we get older. So there's a lot of moving parts to this, but I believe our industry certainly would welcome involvement in that, and to make things more affordable. And there's two different types of affordable. Housing affordability, which is the taxpayer's obligation. Every one of us has to pay for that, right? That's out of our taxes, all right? And we know there's so many people in need, and we're here to help. we're going to need more affordable housing as we get housing affordability is even that much more out of reach. So.
Mr. Chair, your thoughts?
Yeah, we have to look. We certainly, when you're looking at the issues, affordability is one that stands out. We have a very low vacancy rate here. I think about 2.5% vacancy rate. One bedroom average, I think, is $1,215 for renting. And if you think of Ontario Works pays a monthly $733. So you can see there's a significant gap there that has to be made up. And that is where all levels of government play a role. And we have a lot of seasonal type jobs in Niagara, which means that the income that people are going to get is not always as high as they might be in other parts of the province, particularly Toronto. So previously we looked at, oh, well, everybody wanted, and I can recall back when I was on St. Catharines City Council, all that council was prepared to entertain sometimes when new developments are taking place were single family homes and with 60-foot frontages. Developers at that time were saying there's a need for multiple kinds of housing. And when you put together a proposal, they said, we would like to include apartments, townhouses, duplexes, and single family as part of a development. And early on, there was a lot of resistance to that in those days, where residential groups, ratepayers groups within an area were always opposed to anything other than what they had, and that was single family homes with a frontage of either 50 or 60 feet. And for a number of years, that stifled the opportunity to provide different kinds of housing. I think there's a recognition now that there is that need, and certainly the private sector is able to provide that in terms of the skills they have of providing different kinds of housing if the conditions are right. And certainly if you're in the private sector, a motivating factor, as it should be in a free enterprise system, is making a profit on it. So that should not be looked at as a negative. It's part of doing business. But we have a responsibility to ensure that there's affordable housing, and that's where some incentives can work. Financial incentives particularly can work. Also, it is incumbent upon us to try to deal with the situation that Chuck has described in terms of the timing, and because time is money, and time is important as well as because of the pressures that are there, of how we can speed up the process while still making it a reasonable process, one which protects the environment and everything else. I think that if we can find ways to speed that up, that is extremely helpful. And that can be done, that's being done, but to a certain extent at the local level, but also at the provincial level, it can be done as well. So we have to find those kinds of solutions, because I think out of the three that you described, probably affordability is the one which is front and center right now, because of the circumstances faced by people whose incomes are low or in some cases non-existent. So that initial resistance to anything other than single family homes, and we still have, there still can be single family homes within a development, but that initial resistance has resulted in lack of affordability to a certain extent. And I think we have to listen to those who are making those proposals and saying, look, we've got a development with all of these components. Please don't block us when we are trying to provide a solution for you. And I think, again, we can work together with the private sector and the nonprofits in this regard.
A lot of municipal planning comes out of dictates from the province, and we've seen the province in recent years place a lot of focus on intensification as part of affordability and housing strategy. And as Chair Bradley mentioned, we know there's often a challenge with that in terms of neighbors expressing the occasional anxiety about the idea of increasing densities or adding affordable housing to the community. So I'll start with Chair Bradley for a bit of a specific question here. What can local government do to help mitigate the concerns that residents have with the idea of adding intensification to their communities in terms of helping our housing mix?
I think that local representatives simply have to tough it out and explain why this is necessary. Before, I think it was easy to acquiesce to those who were negative about that kind of housing coming in. I think we have to put out and I think some more people are recognizing now, even those who are in existing neighborhoods where, adjacent to that neighborhood, you're proposing different kinds of housing. I think they recognize with members of their family who are going into the market that they need something other than what exists at the present time to be able to get into that market. So I think there's a better understanding in the public, but we who are in elected office have a role and responsibility to play as well. We should try to make deal with pre-approvals, things that are shovel ready, for instance, and that's a role we can play along with the private sector. We could pre-zone a lot of areas for that. Before you get into places where there's an existing neighborhood, but I think we have to stand up to that, and it takes a lot. NIMBYism is certainly one problem. Mm-hmm. And that is something, again, you have to tough that out. And I think many municipal councils today are doing that compared to what would have happened, a generation ago, where they would have simply acquiesced to those who said no to anything other than what they already had. But I think that fact that members of their family, younger members of their family, are needing that kind of housing is there. Also, we have a number of seniors who want to downsize and go into a different kind of housing. And so I think they are going to be a little more receptive to that kind of housing taking place as well. So there's a better understanding by the public, I think, and we as elected representatives have a leadership role to play in persuading people of the necessity and the acceptability of that kind of housing.
I want to ask Nicole, it's not only intensification that tends to get pushback from neighbors on occasion, especially when you're talking about affordable or supportive housing units. You will occasionally get neighbors, sort of expressing some unfortunate sentiments about, I don't want that in my neighborhood. So how much of an impact does that sort of thing have on your clients who are especially, folks who are especially in need of moving into supportive and sustainable housing?
We've moved our shelter a couple of times, and every time we've moved our shelter, there's been some negativity in the neighborhoods that we've moved into, which is really just more fear-based of what might happen. And, in every case, when we move in, the neighbors are quite fine. We're it's not a location where we have people showing up in the middle of the night, or, it's quite safe to have us in your neighborhood. And I think our neighbors will attest to that. When we have clients who are looking for housing, it's not like they're going and looking for housing and saying, I'm coming from a women's shelter and now I need this apartment. So, I don't know that there's any sort of discrimination based on the circumstance, but it's really more about the income, or if you have a single mom who's on OW, who is in competition for an apartment with somebody, maybe a two-parent family, they both work, there's going to be that competition, and our clientele who are on, Ontario Works or ODSP, they don't stand a chance. And it's like a supply and demand situation that we have here too, right? We saw an apartment we were trying to help a client get into, and because there was so much competition, we saw the following day that they had relisted and increased the rental price. And so, you see that in homes, you see bidding wars when people are purchasing homes, but now we're finding that in the rental market as well. There's actual bidding wars on rental units, which is creating a whole other level of issue for, our clients who are looking for apartments. But again, I don't feel like it's really discrimination based on the circumstances that they're coming from, more about, the circumstances, their income, and maybe marital status or whatever that are providing more problems if they're in competition for property.
Chuck, if I can bring this question over to you for a moment. From the home builder's perspective, what's the impact of public sentiment and neighbor pushback on trying to build more affordable housing within established neighborhoods in particular?
Well, I mean, I can go right to Nicole on this. We have a builder developer in Grimsby that actually raised a lot of money walking her shoes for the last couple of years. He has a proposal on Main Street, and he's been fighting with NIMBYism ever since that proposal came out. There is a heritage building on that property, which the proposal was to move that whole heritage building forward and give it to Gillian's place to use and completely fix up. And in behind that, to build a two-story multi-use building. He's almost ready to walk away from it because of the NIMBYism, and he wants to help. And we see the NIMBYism every single day, and it doesn't matter what town you're in, and the hypocrisy, the people that they've got their big fancy houses, but they don't want anybody else to have it. I mean, I live in Niagara Lake. Let's talk about NIMBY city number one in the region, but it happens everywhere. And what we need to do, and as a region, we need to snuff out NIMBYism. And that's what's creating a lot of the problems. That creates a lot of drag time. When you go in for applications, you've got to go into LPAT. It takes 2-3 years to get through LPAT, and you still have to have your site plan approval. It could take 5 years to get something in the ground. You know, we need to educate. I got to use the word, the hypocrites. We need to educate them and say there's no room for this in Niagara. There's no room for NIMBYism. We're all the same people, right? We're here to create a dream. One of the most important things in someone's life is to have a great family and a home, someplace to call their home. And NIMBYism is putting stop signs up everywhere. And Chair Bradley, I'll reach out to you on this. We've got to do some education on this. It makes Nicole's job harder. It makes everybody's job harder. And there's so many people out there that need help. And so many people that say, yeah, we're willing to help, but we don't want it here. Take it and put it up on top of the hill, right, Nicole? That's exactly what they said at the public meeting. If you're going to do that, you take it and put it up on top of the hill. We don't want that in our town.
Yep. We
don't want NIMBYism in our town, and we don't want hypocrites. We all live here together.
And we have to show, Chuck is correct in that, we have to show examples where it's worked as well. You know, there's a lot of fear about something we don't know and we anticipate is going to happen. There are many examples, however, where we have had those kinds of developments that Chuck has described, where they worked out very well. And I think if we can point to those, that makes a big difference, because it's always the unknown, the anticipation. Well, what kind of people are going to move into that? That's really, let's be frank about it. That's often what they're concerned about. One of the, in terms of affordability, one of the challenges is the fact that Ontario Works and Ontario Disability Support rates have really not increased significantly. And so people are left behind. I know it's always a bit controversial when you're trying to do that, but if you look at the cost of living that we're facing at the present time and how it's increased over the years, those rates have not increased as well. And so that keeps a lot of people out of the market. And we see the evictions taking place. They're a big problem now. You keep hearing about renovictions, they call them, and other evictions. And there are going to be times where it's legitimate for an eviction to take place, where the tenant simply is destroying things or making it impossible for everybody else in the development. But there's a lot of renovictions taking place now where people are moved out and they have a hard time finding accommodation. The region can also help with secondary plans. We have a cost share with our local municipalities, and if they need our help in that regard, we can be helpful to them, because certainly moving developments through the process in a timely fashion is significant. First of all, there's a need for them. And second, the people who are in the business will tell you that time is money. And the longer you take, force them to take, the more it's going to cost. And if you can do it more expeditiously, that you're going to be able to provide the kind of housing you want. But everybody's, I think, here is on the same wavelength about NIMBYism. And it is, well, Chuck's used the word hypocritical for those who have already have their place and were able to afford it in those days, who now want to prevent others from having affordable housing nearby just because the housing isn't exactly the same as they have. So again, those of us who are elected representatives have a role to educate and to advocate, and not simply bow to the pressure of NIMBYism.
In terms of education, I'd like to bring it over to Joanne. You had a comment, Joanne?
Oh, I was just going to say, just in regards to intensification, is that one thing we have to realize is that within all the municipalities in the region, that people, that intensification, really the provincial policy means that there's going to be, more of a density in those corridors, in those major corridors, as I said, across Niagara, which means that not everybody is going to drive a car that has an apartment. That the design has to look at people being able to walk, people being able to walk to their grocery stores or schools or whatever, and that's going to be a change in our community, because people who require this housing will not always might use a bike or might not have a car. So that also transportation is important thing to consider as to how the amenities in these communities that we're looking for, that future ready, also accommodate people who are in attainable housing.
Now, I have a question I wanted to toss over to Nicole. I remember from my past life covering all those long regional council meetings, one of the issues that often takes place when we're talking about affordable housing, especially subsidized housing, is that the state of public housing stock is often a bit of a struggle to maintain. That often when people will move into a supportive housing unit, that the maintenance of the units is somewhat difficult to keep up. How much of a challenge is adequate housing for your clients, just in terms of the housing that they're able to afford being livable, well-maintained, and sort of up to spec?
That's a real issue. Some of the apartments that our clients are looking at are not fit for humans to live there, let alone, a young mother with 2 small children. They're just completely unsafe conditions. So the ones that, the apartments or units that we find that are affordable are not fit to live in. So that's a real problem. And I think something that also needs to really be addressed is, keeping these, not only having the units, but maintaining them so that they are safe and livable. It's a really big issue. And even to find suitable living arrangements, especially in West Niagara, impossible. There's only, especially for those under 55. There's one building that has 1-bedroom units. If you're single and you only need a 1-bedroom in Beamsville, there's one. In Grimsby, there are no affordable housing options through NRH. So, they're looking, and to Joanne's point, people who have lived and have lives maybe in Grimsby have to move to St. Catharines just to find somewhere to live. And then, they're uprooting their children, they can't, if they're relying on public transportation, they can't get from St. Catharines to Grimsby to go to their job. And so now, they're on top of, moving out of the place where they have support of family and friends and employment. They're moving to a strange city. Now they're unemployed and living in deplorable conditions. So yeah, in addition to just being able to find something that's affordable, being able to find something that's affordable and safe and habitable, that's a whole other ballgame.
Mm-hmm. So I'll throw over to Chair Bradley here, just acknowledging that affordable housing is in large part a regional responsibility. I've sat in on enough regional budget meetings to understand the tug and, the back and forth between the importance of service delivery and the challenge of keeping things affordable for taxpayers and ratepayers. So how can the region address this issue of not just the availability of housing stock, but the adequacy of the housing stock for those who are the most vulnerable in Niagara?
Well, this is where we have a role to play in advocating with senior levels of government. As I mentioned, there was a period of time when both the provincial and federal government decided that they weren't going to be directly involved in housing in terms of providing financing. We have a role to advocate, and I think that the general public has a role to advocate for providing that kind of funding. And I must say, in recent times, both through Minister Clark provincially and to Minister Hassan federally, those kinds of dollars are flowing. It's also important that Niagara get its fair share. There are other municipalities that can appear to be worse off than we are, and perhaps they are in some cases, but I don't think we should ever stop advocating. And it's been effective, I must say. There's a sympathetic ear. It doesn't always follow with dollars and cents, and also policies which can be helpful. Again, I go back to the fact that people in the lower echelons who are reliant upon the Ontario Disability Support Program or Ontario Works really haven't had the amount of money they have available to them keep up. And that has put them even further behind the eight ball in terms of affordability. So advocacy is exceedingly important for us. And we do it through the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and we do it through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, both. And we have representatives from our regional council who sit on both of those particular bodies. And I think you will find a consensus among municipalities because when we get together and we discuss things together, we as a collective and as municipalities can have an impact in persuading the senior levels of government to provide that kind of funding particularly for people at the very lowest end of the income level who are struggling very much, have always struggled, but are struggling very much in the reality of the new market that's out there.
Pivot to Chuck for a moment, just in looking at things from the perspective of home builders. When we're talking about building both affordable and adequate housing, how do we sort of square that circle of housing that's both affordable and physically high quality, housing that's able to sort of maintain its value and maintain its sort of integrity? How do we build a business case for that?
First and foremost, we do have a building code and it's very, very stringent. Doesn't matter whether it's built by Niagara Regional Housing or by one of our members. So for sustainability, there's the building code that has to be followed. It's like I say, it's no different. Niagara Regional Housing they can say, okay, well, this is for regional housing, so you don't have to put 2x6 walls in, you're using 2x4 walls. Not how it works. Has to be Energy Star, has to be energy efficient. How do we do it? It's the process, right? And I mean, we know how it works. The government is meant to run the government, all right? If, most of the times I say to them, how do we get more affordable housing? Housing affordability? Get out of our way. Let us do it. The region doesn't tell GM how to build their cars. All right. That's mandated by the provincial government. We can build the sustainable housing. Does it have to have all the bells and whistles? I don't believe so. None of us started in homes with all the bells and whistles. All right. But it has to be comfortable and it has to be sustainable and it has to have that feeling where people feel like they're home. They're in a safe place. Today's world, a lot of people need that. Can we build it? Absolutely, we can.
Jeff, at this point, if I can ask Chuck, because this is an old saw that comes up all the time, and I want to see if Chuck, and he will comment on it. There are a lot of people who have new solutions, and one of them they float all the time is inclusionary housing. And I'm interested in having Chuck tell you what he thinks of inclusionary housing, because some people see this as a panacea, and Chuck has qualms about it that he thinks don't make it a potential solution. So Chuck, sorry to take over, but I really think we should hear from Chuck on that, because as you know, Chuck, it's floated many times.
I'm happy to hear from Chuck on this, but I'm going to pivot to Joanne after Chuck gives us that answer.
Okay, so Jim and I have dealt with inclusionary zoning actually back when he was the minister. I think it was 24 hours after he was named Minister of Housing and Affairs. His very first meeting was with me, so welcome to the ministry. However, we discussed inclusionary zoning. And when we look at inclusionary zoning, what we need to understand, okay, is whether we take a building, right, a 6-story building, and one of the floors is meant for, say, lower income and is subsidized. Well, it's subsidized by the builder and the developer. But we also look at the other 5 floors subsidize that. Right. And that's not fair to the people that are buying the units. Right. Just like when we go in a subdivision, if you look at a 10, say it's a cul-de-sac and there's 10 houses there, and the developer builds them, and then 2 of them are affordable housing, the other 8 homes are paying that extra to subsidize that. I've always stated, and I stated it earlier on in our conversation, affordable housing is an issue that every one of us needs to be involved in. That's our obligation as citizens, whether we pay more in taxes or whatnot. And, we hate that dirty word, but that's the way it should go. It shouldn't be subsidized just by certain individuals. That's got to be subsidized by the public as a whole. That's where the issue lies with inclusionary zoning. I'm getting the same unit as the person on the first floor, but I'm paying $100,000 more. I don't think anybody on this call would agree with that themselves. That's why the situation has to be, if there's buy-in, if there's, reduction in development charges and whatnot. Keep in mind, folks, every home that's built here and every condo that's built in Niagara and every townhouse that's built here in Niagara, on their development charges, the new home purchaser kicks in just over $3,000 to regional housing, just in the development charges. That's before they even pay their tax bill. So, the new home purchaser is kicking in on that day in and day out through the development charge process. So when it comes to inclusionary zoning, if there's a system that works, that doesn't make the other units pay more money, let's figure it out. But nobody's come, Jim, we've talked about this for how many years now? 10?
Yeah.
Nobody has the answer.
Well, hopefully Joanne may be able to help us shed some light on some of these topics. I know, Joanne, you published a report recently entitled Looking Ahead and Looking Up Affordable Housing in Niagara. You projected we're going to need more than 67,000 more homes in Niagara by 2041 just to meet the needs of our population. That's a lot of homes. So what do you think is what do you see as some potential solutions that are being overlooked to help meet that demand?
I don't really see the things that are being overlooked. I just see projects that are taking place. The fact that the North Church Court, as an example, was a project, successful project that took place in St. Catharines. Also, Oakdale Commons, the YWCA, has built a 24-unit supportive housing and housing for families. So that those are sort of innovative projects that are taking place. Also, people have to, as I mentioned before, intensification that across Niagara. People have to think about builds that are going to be higher than what they're probably used to seeing. They are going to be more intensive. That's the way that, and also, the way that projects are going. Also, Niagara Regional Housing is undertaking, repurposing some of the housing units that they have in Niagara Falls and rebuilding and making, building units with more units for that meet the affordable housing criteria. So those are and also there are other things that people can do within their own neighborhoods. The secondary suites is one example that's really taken off in Welland as an example. So that there are ways of increasing. It's not, some of these are aren't going to get where we need to go. But there are various ways of increasing our housing stock within our municipalities, I should say.
So as we go into our last 10 minutes, I think the next topic of conversation that I'll toss out there for everyone is this thought. When we're talking about housing developments, a lot of what gets spoken of is sort of on two ends of the spectrum. On one end, you've got condominium type developments. On the other, you have discussion of affordable units on the lower end of the market. What often gets missed is the missing middle, I think. So I'll start with Chair Bradley. How can we encourage more uptake of affordable units for the mid-market, for example, rental apartments that are affordable for middle-income people?
Well, again, supply is going to be important there. The more supply there is, the more affordability there's going to be for people. Again, we have to partner with the private sector. We in government have to partner with the private sector for getting what we refer to as the kind of housing we really need, or the right kind of housing. One of them, the instruments we can use are incentives, financial incentives, particularly geared to people who genuinely need housing and wouldn't be able to access that kind of housing unless there were incentives there. It's one thing to say to the private sector, you should build this, but without incentives, they're going to look at other options that are out there where there's more money to be made, because that's the business they're in. And so if you're saying we all must play a role, we play a role through those incentives for affordable housing and mid-affordable housing, not just affordable housing at the very lowest end, but mid-affordable housing. And I'll go back to the other again, that we all have to make a better effort to move the process more quickly. And that's again what our builders would say. If you put in the services, for instance, if there's service areas out there and we're able to move in with our building as quickly as possible, meeting all the requirements, as Chuck said, there's a national building code that we have to adhere to, and everybody has to adhere to. But they're not challenging that. What they're challenging is the length of time that it takes. And I think that's where we have to make a greater effort as well, because the pressure is far greater today than it would have been a dozen years ago in terms of that need out there. So I would put that on the table as being helpful in that regard, and meeting that particular problem.
Mm-hmm. Joanne, how big of a problem do you see the missing middle as in terms of our housing mix right now, the mid-market?
Well, I think it's a problem, and it's going to be a bigger problem. We were talking earlier, Chair Bradley talked about, people in, when he was city councillor a few decades ago, the fact that that housing, a lot of people lived in single detached dwellings. But, people, the whole economy was different then. We see more people now, especially in Niagara Falls area, in the tourism industry, making minimum wage. Even with the increases in minimum wage, that's not going to be enough to really purchase any type of homes. They will be looking for rental units, and that stock is really not there. So that we're going to see the fact that there's going to be an increased demand, and the supply won't be meeting that demand occurring to our present situation.
Mm-hmm. Now, Nicole, with the clients that you deal with every day, obviously domestic violence can strike anyone at any level of income or economic prosperity. When we're talking about transitioning folks into housing, with the escalation of costs, I imagine it's much more difficult, not only for people who are vulnerable financially, but for even people who would be of middle income on their own to move into housing. So how big of an issue is escalation in the middle of the market for your clients?
Yeah, I mean, it affects our clients at every level. We have some who are high income, middle income, low income, and it's really a trickle down effect, right? So if you have, kind of these middle income families that are looking for rental units, they're looking for something a little bit higher. They're taking those units they can't find them in their kind of budget or market. So they're taking maybe something with a lower price tag away from somebody who then can afford that. So it's like this whole trickle down effect that you experience when there's just a lack of available options.
And Jeff, from your perspective, how can the home building sector address the middle of the market, especially in terms of mid-income rental units?
Well, I mean, to start off, I think we discussed it, and Chair Bradley said, the moving forward, getting, specific site plans and saying, okay, they're shovel-ready projects, just like when the region goes to the federal government for a grant. A lot of them are shovel-ready.
Ready, yeah.
There's no red tape. There's no red tape. There's no. Now keep in mind, because when it comes to buying a piece of property, raw land, the developer can borrow what that property's worth. After that, when he's got to put the services in and everything else, until he gets his approval, he can't do anything because the bank's not going to lend him money for that. So all that money is tied up on that. And if we can get that approval process moving quicker and getting the shovels into the ground, 3 or 4 year lag with your money tied up it's very, very hard on any investor. And I just look at the people around this table. If you got RRSPs, all right, if you see 3 or 4 years where you didn't make a dime on them, you're probably going to call your broker and say, listen, I don't want these. I want you to find me something that's actually going to make me money. It doesn't have to be 25% on the dollar. But the overhead costs to develop are just incredible. And it also, and we'll go back to the NIMBY, the hypocrisy and whatnot. And, we need to build these units. But, when we look at the hypocrisy, and because I always say this, Nicole and Joanne and every one of us has seen it. I grew up in foster homes all my life. All right. And when we place affordable housing in a subdivision over here, right, those people need to feel like part of that community. Those people don't do that. There's the hypocrisy, the NIMBYism. They're still, just because they don't have as much money as you, most kids still need a hug at night. They still need a warm bed, and they should be welcomed into the neighborhood. This is education that needs to go out. I know I sound like a preacher, folks, but I'm very passionate about this. We need to educate the people, right? It's not all about me. It's about us.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. When you move people, when you take the others and you move them and you put them, low income families off on their own, a lot of them, like this is like cyclical, right? It's second and third generation low income families. Some people don't have the life skills they need, and then they're surrounded by others who don't have those same life skills. When you build a community, like these inclusionary communities, I live in a very safe neighborhood in St. Catharines that has, mixed housing. We have single family homes, we have some newer homes, some older homes, apartment buildings, townhouses, and it really feels like a community. It's a safe community. And people just need to get over that feeling of, I don't want those people in my neighborhood. It's inhuman to me to take people, human beings, and push them and segregate them as though they're the other. It's really, it's disheartening, and it doesn't, we're a compassionate city, and let's practice what we preach.
Yes. I agree.
Yeah, I think we can all agree with that one. I think we all kind of realize that this is a massive issue. We could probably go on talking about this for 3 or 4 more hours and still only scratch the surface on this thing. Unfortunately, it looks like we've just about hit our time, so I think that may just have to be our last question. So I'd like to thank all of our panelists for joining us today. I think this is a really great discussion. We've really, we've sort of scratched the surface of this thing, and I'm sure we'll continue to talk about it for days and years to come as we all figure out what the solution is to our housing crisis. And thanks to everyone who took time to join us today. It's been great to see so many people come out, engage with these issues. They're important conversations, and they will go on. On behalf of my colleague John and myself, it's been a real honor to engage with the Road to Recovery series. We're looking forward to continuing on down the road to recovery. And we will be back in the spring with the new lineup. So stay tuned, stay safe out there, and take care. Thank you again for joining us today.
Good to see you all.
Thank you so
you.
much.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.